Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Elida Estate Falda Anaerobic Slow Dry Processed Panama from Substance Cafe. There's the bag right there. And Substance, based out of Paris, France. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, with our most recent review being about 4 months ago. We picked this coffee up from Airworks as part of one of their special releases, and the conversation behind this coffee was pretty funny, as we asked Airworks what they would be bringing in from Substance, and initially they mentioned that they would be bringing in an Elida Estate Falda coffee, and given that we'd had such positive experiences with September's version of that coffee, we decided to go ahead and get it, only to be told that it was going to be a natural processed version of that coffee. We said that we hadn't reviewed too many of Substance's natural processed coffees, so we said, yeah, we'll still go ahead and get this coffee, only to later find out that it was in fact an anaerobic slow dry processed coffee. And after that we said, well, we already purchased the coffee, we haven't reviewed any of Substance's more processed coffees, and we also have heard from you guys that we don't review enough heavily processed coffees in general, so this one in a lot of ways kills a lot of birds with one stone. So we will see how this coffee turned out, as this right here is day 50. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Substance's recipe, which is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 91 degrees Celsius, about 195 degrees Fahrenheit. And we like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this one, Substance has a reputation for being one of the lightest roasting coffee roasters in the entire world, and this coffee was certainly no exception, as even with the processing you can tell that it offered some extremely light qualities to it. So for that reason we can say that this one also does skew on the extremely light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 28 through the V60, so our first impression, and there were immediately concerns that this coffee was probably going to be a little bit heavier than I was looking for, as there was a very strong perfumey floral and heavy tropical quality in the berry sense. However, the cleanliness was holding up well for what the coffee was, as it does skew a little bit in the expected sense giving the processing, so it was an okay first impression, but we've also had some slight issues with Substance's coffees being a little bit tame. We've said the same thing when it comes to the Picky Chemist coffees. A lot of these extremely light coffee roasters can be a little bit tame, but this one definitely didn't offer too many tame qualities to it, as it was very much in your face right off the bat. Day 31 through the Chemex, and the coffee is a bit better, largely due to the heaviness being toned down. Tropical forward once again with slightly better definition, and the overall cleanliness holding up very well, as it's just better on the initial stages compared to a lot of its contemporaries. So, I mean, I've had a lot of coffees like this in the past, and all of them seem to go even heavier in that berry sense and that fermenty sense. But this one right here still maintained its structure relatively well based off of these first couple of impressions. So I said it's either going to hold up throughout the entirety or it's going to lose its structure at some point. So on day 35, we opted for the UFO brewer, and the coffee is continuing to maintain the line of being too intense and heavy, while it's still offering more of the natural characteristics in the overly processed sense, while still maintaining that certain level of cleanliness to it. Outside of that, there's been a little difference based off of the first couple of experiences that we've had, and even in comparison to a lot of the more heavily processed coffees in this same sort of category. So very tropical focused, very berry focused, very heavy perfumey focused once again. And you can probably tell by the notes as of this moment that our big discussion point on this coffee was just seeing how clean it was going to be throughout. Day 38 through the V60 with Substance's recipe, so 16.67 to 1 at 91 Celsius. And the coffee's about the same. It's been pretty consistent overall. Feels like the intensity is increasing with time, but it is starting to feel a little bit better structured, still holding up pretty well despite the processing. Focus does continue to remain on the bright tropicality once again, so we continue to highlight and focus on those qualities and characteristics of this coffee. Day 41 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee does continue to remain very consistent, offering the heavier tropical qualities. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on this day, as I found notes including papaya, cherry jam, heavier darker berries, that grape-like quality, and a slightly more silky body to it. Cleanliness is fair for what it was, as this coffee does continue to remain pretty direct, but it is certainly not reaching the point of being overbearing, which will definitely be demonstrated within the tasting wheel. Day 44 final notes we have through the V60 with Substances recipe, and the coffee has been extremely consistent to the point where most of these days I could take the same notes that we had for the previous day, as there was very little change. I would say maybe some days were slightly more clean, slightly more well-defined, but for the most part, the structure of this coffee remained intact throughout the entirety. Highlighted by the tropicality and plenty of the citric brightness once again, it is still clean enough with the berry qualities remaining present and a relatively cleaner and slightly toned down comparison to some of the earlier days. Citric qualities ranging from a bergamot and orange-like characteristic to plenty of the perfumey florality and tropicality in line with the listed violet and lavender, as well as the previously mentioned papaya-like characteristics as well. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s. Let's go through them. And we'll start with the finish level 4. That is a massive win. And I think I heard one person say that they found this coffee to be extraordinarily sweet. And I could see that this coffee is definitely on the verge of being overbearing, but for the most part, it just maintained really nice structure. And a lot of people would probably go into this coffee maybe hoping for a level 5 in terms of the finish and sweetness, but I was very much hoping that it would stay there at the level 4. I do wonder what would have happened if we would have pushed this coffee, but if I'm being completely honest, I imagine that I would not have liked this coffee whatsoever had we pushed it. This is fine for me. Level 4 for both of them, especially the sweetness. The finish does definitely come in that kind of long-lasting tropical sense that is synonymous with a lot of more processed coffees. Acidity level 4, same thing. I've found that a lot of these more processed coffees can have an overbearing and overly intense acidity, but this one also maintained its structure. It didn't become too overbearing and heavy. So all three of those things at the top of the tasting wheel are definitely a big win for me, as I felt like this coffee was in danger and jeopardy of that based off the first couple of tries. Florality level 4, I believe the only notes they had listed for this coffee were all floral notes. I do know that they have the violet and lavender. I think maybe the other one was jasmine, but for the most part, it had a lot more of those heavier, perfumey floral qualities that are also synonymous with this type of coffee. So level 4, where we opted to put that, same thing. I'm happy it did not reach that level 5, largely because that would have made this one a little bit too overbearing in that more perfumey floral sense. Citrus fruit level 4, it is a geisha, so I guess despite the fact that they didn't have any sort of citric notes to it, at the end of the day, it's still a geisha coffee, so it still should have plenty of those citric qualities to it. And it did for me anyway, especially in that more tropical sense, so level 4 where we opted to put that. Let's go through the level 3s. We'll start with the berry level 3. I remember making this tasting wheel thinking to myself that the berry probably deserves to be in equal measure as the citrus fruit, as it's pretty prominent in that tropical sense, but at the end of the day I said it's just kind of skewing a little bit more in that citric sense today. So level 3 where we opted to put it on this day, but it could probably be right alongside the citrus fruit in that level 4 sense. A couple of level 3s. We'll start with the body level 3. I mentioned that it does have a very slight sort of silky characteristic to it, a little bit more texture and body than you would expect for a Panamanian geisha. I should say a fair bit more body than what you'd expect for a Panamanian geisha, but I feel like that gave it some additional depth. And then the final thing we're discussing, definitely the most important thing we're discussing, level 3 for cleanliness. So there are two ways to look at this. The first being that it is a Panamanian geisha, so you would hope that it would be higher than level 3. With the second being that this isn't a, let's say, toned down Panamanian geisha in terms of the processing. This one has quite a bit of processing, so a win is anything that doesn't score below a level 3, and this one was a true level 3. I've had coffees, natural processed coffees, that were significantly less clean than this. I've had natural processed Panamanian geishas. I've had natural processed Ethiopian geishas that were less clean than this one. So given that this one had that extra processing and is very much a true level 3, that's a massive win for me. And I would take that going into it. So I'm happy with the fact that it did reach that mark when I'm looking at this tasting wheel. But outside of that, as I'm looking at it, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. As far as more processed coffees go, I am very happy with the way that this one turned out, largely because I've had so many coffees that have this same sort of extended processing that I don't like. It's pretty well documented at this point that I do have a strong preference towards cleaner coffees. And the first time I brewed this coffee, I definitely had a lot of concerns that it was going to reach that mark, but it never did. This coffee was remarkably consistent throughout the entirety of it. The slight adjustments that we did make, truth be told, they're actually pretty significant adjustments, never seemed to yield significant results to this coffee, which is I would say both a good thing and a bad thing, because if you did want to change this coffee up a little bit, then you don't necessarily have the capability of doing so. I imagine you might be able to if you really push this coffee or really went low on the extraction of this coffee. But then the other positive of that is that you probably had a good idea of what you were going to expect from this coffee every time you brewed it. So for me, that was a win. It continued to maintain that same level of cleanliness right from the onset throughout the entirety of it, with certain days being a little cleaner. So I will take that every single time. And that's a nice testament to Substance, who is a coffee roaster that I very much enjoy. I continue to have great success with their coffees, even something like this, which on paper and in theory is not in line with my own preferences whatsoever. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you do enjoy those heavier qualities of these sort of coffees, those very strong perfumey floral qualities, those very strong tropical qualities of it, but you do want them to present in a slightly more clean sense with maybe a little bit more body and that very light profile. This one combines all of those really well. As I mentioned, it's not my type of coffee whatsoever, but I found myself enjoying it enough each and every time that we did end up brewing it. So definitely a lot of positives to be found within this coffee. Kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. Enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here is my review of the Elida Estate Falda Anaerobic Slow Dry Processed Panama from Substance Cafe. Thank you for watching.